Waiver Wire Week 10. We're all the way here at Week 10. The season's moving along. We're into November. Fantasy football playoffs in sight. This week, not the best one for the waiver wire. This is also a week where we're starting to really deal with the bye weeks. Bye weeks are going to come, and these are going to be like busy bye weeks, like 4 teams a week. This is where your depth will matter. So the decisions you make with your waiver wire, even in a week now where it's sort of like hey, I don't see a whole lot of guys that are super impactful to me if I'm in a deeper format league. Some of these guys are going to go right into your flex during these bye weeks. And let's get these bye weeks out of the way. Right here at Waiver Wired, we always want to stress that we want to be a week ahead on the bye weeks. So we really don't want to get ourselves caught up in trying to replace multiple positions in a single week. We want to plan ahead for bye weeks. That's one of the edges that you can get in fantasy football is being a week ahead. Being a week ahead, whether it's adding a player before they completely pop off, paying attention to usage before the stats come, and then also being a week ahead in your planning. It's just a sort of like I don't want to have to compete with my league for multiple guys, multiple positions. Maybe it could be as simple as switching your defense or kicker a week early. Little things to save fab when these weeks become condensed. Those are the edges that we want to find. So let's go ahead and get this out of the way. This week, you have 4 teams on bye. And I was going through and setting some of my lineups early this morning, and there's some guys for me that I'm going to really be missing this week. Obviously, Green Bay on a bye. That's a tough one. No Jaden Reed, no Jordan Love, no Josh Jacobs. Seattle is on a bye. No Ken Walker. JSN just had the game of his life. A lot of you are streaming Jonnu Smith in leagues. This is going to be a chance for DK Metcalf to get healthier, though. So there's a big silver lining there with Seattle. Las Vegas, no Brock Bowers this week. And no Jacoby Myers, who's really been getting like wide receiver 1 usage, not necessarily production, but the usage has been there. He's sort of been a sneaky flex for people. And then Cleveland, I think this bye is actually coming at the right time because we saw Jameis and the Browns play extremely well against Baltimore and then sort of fall apart against the Chargers in many ways. This is going to be a week for them to sort of get things together. And I think this will be beneficial for us as fantasy managers, really just to kind of have a little bit of self-scouting and a game plan. And then week 11, Arizona, Carolina, the Giants, and the Buccaneers. So hopefully after week 11, we get back Mike Evans for Tampa Bay. But there's been Baker Mayfield, Rashad White, Bucky Irving in some leagues, and then obviously Malik Neighbors on the Giants. Carolina, Chuba Hubbard has been in our starting lineups for multiple weeks. And then Arizona with guys like Trey McBride, that's going to be a difficult one for a lot of fantasy managers. So we want to try to be a week ahead. And then anybody tuning into this podcast, this YouTube show for the first time, on this show, we are going to look at players largely who are available in 70% of leagues or more. We are going to go deep. This is not a shallow waivers show. If you want shallow waivers recommendations, you want I saw somebody on a big network telling people to go out and pick up Rome Odunze and to pick up Cedric Tillman this week in week 10. I'm like, what league on earth can I go get Rome Odunze and Cedric Tillman in week 10? Those guys were drafted in my leagues. And I know if you're watching this show, they were drafted in Odunze was drafted in your league, and Cedric Tillman was picked up weeks and weeks and weeks ago. So if Cedric Tillman's still sitting on your waiver wire, it's time to maybe step up the level of competition next year in your fantasy football league. But we're going to concentrate on players that are available to you in deeper formats. And let's get this out of the way. We always are going to talk about a couple players that are going to be available to you in 60% of leagues. And some of these guys are going to be available. It's like we also need to double check and make sure some of these guys might not be available in like a more deep format, because sometimes with like roster needs and with cuts and with bye weeks, you can find like weird stuff on the waiver wire. But let's get this out of the way. Hunter Henry, he needs to be rostered. And I'm sort of tired of talking about Hunter Henry because I feel like I've been talking about him we did a preseason waiver wire show. So I feel like I've talked about him for like 11 weeks. This is like the 11th time I've had to talk about Hunter Henry. And There's nothing really exciting about Hunter Henry, but Hunter Henry continues to perform, especially with Drake May under center. Spoiler alert, Drake May is going to be very high up in our top 10 rankings. I'll reveal that at the end of the show. We give a top 10 overall. But Henry, he's been targeted at least 5 times for 4 straight games, had 7 catches for 56 yards on Sunday. Like, Henry's locked in. He is what he is. Not that exciting, but he's a low-end tight end 1 rest of the season with Drake May. Not enough competition for targets for him phased out ever. Tyler Allgeier, available in 61% of leagues. One of the best handcuffs in football. Bijan Robinson, locked in. But Tyler Allgeier, also through these bye weeks, Allgeier might go into your RB2 spot. Allgeier might go into your flex spot. Because when the bye weeks get difficult, a guy like Allgeier, where you have access to a very solid offense in Atlanta, and a guy we know is going to get weekly touches, that guy can help us. Your ceiling outcome scoring-wise during bye weeks goes down slightly because the rest of the league has fewer players to deal with, and you have fewer players to deal with. So sometimes a guy like Allgeier can be helpful to us. Taysom Hill, available in 63% of leagues. And if you're watching this and you're like in an FFPC format, this is a guy as a quarterback. But if you're in NFFC, you're in Yahoo, Sleeper, ESPN, I believe Taysom Hill is tight end eligible in all of those. I certainly know he is in NFFC. Taysom Hill is very much on the radar again. And this is sort of like, I don't know if this was necessarily the plan, but every year they sort of try to get away from it. And now there's all this attrition. Rashid Shaheed, done for the year. Chris Olave, another concussion. Taysom Hill is going to get a lot of touches this week. He had a rushing touchdown on Sunday, 60 total yards, had a pass attempt. So, like, they're going to use Taysom Hill. Even with Dennis Allen being fired, they're not going to, like, get away from Taysom Hill. So that could be a little bit of a cheat code if you need production at the tight end position. Braelon Allen, available in 67% of leagues, falls into the elite handcuff category, would be a weekly top 15 running back if Breece Hall were to miss time. Bo Nix, available to you in 66% of leagues. Bo Nix and the Broncos struggled against Baltimore. Complete beatdown. Baltimore really, really showed up there. But from weeks 5 through 8, Bo Nix was the quarterback 3 overall. He's got rushing upside. He's playing with a little bit of swag. He caught a touchdown pass. He's on the streaming radar. Jalen McMillan missed Monday Night Football with an injury, but we want to keep an eye on him. Available in 66% of leagues. He led Tampa Bay in wide receiver snap share in week 8. You have that week 11 bye. I think coming out of the week 11 bye, if healthy, it could be like McMillan on the field with Mike Evans. I know Sterling Shepard made some plays, but I know they like McMillan internally. Rashad Bateman, available in 67% of leagues. Lamar Jackson, absolutely playing fantastic. Deontay Johnson makes the Rashad Bateman addition a little bit sketchier because Deontay is going to develop into a guy who gets at least a few targets a game for Baltimore. And Rashad Bateman could get boxed out, but he's had some strong games. If you're in a deeper format, that gets me access to the Baltimore Ravens. So I'm not like anti-adding Bateman if you're in a deep format. He's had some very helpful weeks, and he still was on the field a good deal of amount, and he had 4 targets this past week. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about players that are available to you in at least 70% of leagues. This is the week where we need to shore up our benches. We need to get our rosters improved as we head into all these bye weeks, and the fantasy football playoffs are on the horizon. We'll be right back.
Oh, every week I'm answering these start-sit questions on Sunday morning. I go to the weekly rankings on PlayerProfiler.com just to make sure that my instincts are correct, and sometimes they're not. And guess what? More often than not, I go with the projections. You may not feel great about starting Daniel Jones or Wan'Dale Robinson, but the projections say, hey, that's the move. It may not feel right, but you use those projections to get it right. That's the power of the Player Profiler system. It's Evan Ringler, it's Bradley Stalder, it's Theo Gremminger, of course, it's Billy Muzio making these rankings possible. The season rankings, so you know who to pick up, who to trade for. The dynasty rankings are part of this. The offensive line rankings from Dan Fornick, one of the best in the business. Then we get our cornerback rankings, which show which corners are matched up with which wide receivers. And now, in collaboration with the IDP show, we have IDP rankings. Did you know that? Did you? So go to playerprofiler.com. Use promo code PODFATHER. Get you 25% off the player rankings package right now at playerprofiler.com. Enjoy!
Welcome back to Waiver Wired. Theo Gremminger. This is week 10 of the Waiver Wire. We're getting there. Like, we're right around the corner. Like, this has been nonstop. The season feels longer because of all the injuries and the attrition, but hopefully you've been able to pick up a lot of these guys. This has been actually a very solid year for this show and a very solid year for the Waiver Wire in general. I think when we look back at some of the additions, I mean, anybody who added Cedric Tillman couple weeks back, added Tyrone Tracy early in the season. Like, there's been a bunch of these guys that have been able to help you out, and hopefully we're going to hit on more. You also have this year where there has been fewer running back injuries, and I think that's affecting the scoring, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to see it in the second half of the season. So a lot of these running back drafters who are sitting on a very productive running backs are getting a little comfy right now. We're seeing the injuries at the wide receiver position. The season's longer. You're going to see multiple running backs do what Ray Davis did a couple of weeks back, where they get their opportunity and they shine. You're going to see it potentially at other positions as well. So don't get comfortable. Continue to be a step ahead of your league mates and continue to add ascending players and players getting increased usage as the season moves along. Also, another note, I am recording this early in the morning on Tuesday. So I'm going to talk about the Khalil Herbert trade, but there could be more trades. So make sure you stick with us right here at Player Profiler. We're going to talk about any trades that happen, give you that breaking news. But there could be more fantasy football related trades than simply Khalil Herbert a little throughout the day before the trade deadline. So let's get after it. Quarterback, we got to start out the top. And newsflash, like, I'm going to continue to pound the table for you to add Drake May. Drake May is my number one addition this week on the entire waiver wire. And there's a few people who I'm friends with in the industry who will usually not rank a streaming quarterback number one when they're ranking. But Drake May, to me, has that upside that if I'm in a fantasy football playoff match and I feel like I'm an underdog, I want to have a guy like Drake May that I can roll out there that I think has that immense upside. And it comes down to it. We've seen it with Drake May with the passing touchdowns. We've seen him put up numbers. Like, we saw 2 QB1 weeks in a row where it was largely on the strength of his passing numbers. But what we've seen over the last 2 weeks is the elite rushing upside for a big, strong, athletic quarterback like May. This past week against Tennessee, he finished with 95 rushing yards. He's also so elusive in the pocket. This is a guy where if you saw the touchdown at the end of the game, how he just evades tacklers, moves around. This is a very athletic quarterback, very underrated in terms of his athleticism. But he had in the previous week, in week 8, he had that 17-yard touchdown run where he looked like Josh Allen. So I want access to Drake May, even if it means I'm not starting him every week. There's going to be weeks you want access to Drake May. I also don't want somebody in my league to get a Drake May bailout as a solid QB2 for them. So Drake May, my number one addition on the week. Even if you don't need a quarterback, you have to at least price check him. And it's ridiculous to me that Drake May actually is available in 89% of leagues right now. His roster percentage actually went down after the Jets game where he was knocked out of the game. So I understand it. People were scared of the concussion. They didn't want to roster him. But it's sort of like they've created a new market where you can add Drake May this week and just add him. We don't need to even go into it anymore. Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones had his best game of the season, finished with 2 touchdown passes and another on the ground. He's gone over 50 rushing yards in 2 out of his last 4 games played. This is Daniel Jones is not like, we don't want to get too hyped. Earlier in the year, he was putting up that high-end QB2 production. So maybe this is a sign of things to come. Certainly he has Malik Neighbors. Tyrone Tracy has come on. Theo Johnson, we'll talk about him later. But Daniel Jones goes up against Carolina this week. So if you're in like a super flex format, be excited about Daniel Jones. Russell Wilson is one where he's a very interesting quarterback to add. If you need a QB2 or if you want a potential streamer for later in the season, Russell Wilson is one to consider. He's had 260 plus passing yards in each of his first 2 starts of the year. And his next 2 games are like favorable fantasy matchups against Washington and Baltimore. Locked in Superflex starter and a single QB like streaming consideration if he has another solid performance. I think like Russell Wilson, we'll learn a lot more over the next few weeks, but this AFC North, these matchups could turn into like higher scoring ones than we're used to seeing from this division in previous seasons. Joe Flacco, available in 84% of leagues, very disappointing in Minnesota, but Indianapolis says they're going to keep him as the starter. He's a super flex starter. We've seen it with him. Guy passes for some touchdowns. The performances will be better than we saw in Minnesota. If you're in a deep super flex league only, Cooper Rush should start in Dallas with Dak Prescott out. This is somebody where we should have very low expectations. Lower your expectations for all Dallas pass catchers. This could be a mess. But I don't think Cooper Rush is going to be as bad as we saw with like the Miami quarterback situation. We've seen Cooper Rush start NFL games. He's been with the franchise for a while. I guess you're hoping for low-end QB2. But the thing is, in Superflex, all starting quarterbacks have some utility. If Cooper Rush fails, we could see Trey Lance. And for fantasy football, Trey Lance would be better because we get the rushing upside. Jameis Winston, available in 87% of leagues. We talked about Cleveland goes on the bye. This is going to be good for Jameis. Like we saw very good Jameis against Baltimore. We saw bad Jameis against the Chargers. And I think that Chargers defense is really coming on, but that was an ugly one. Obviously, Cedric Tillman still produced. Obviously, the passing volume is still there for a lot of guys, but Jameis needs this bye week. The Browns need this bye week to sort of get things settled out moving forward. Bryce Young or Andy Dalton, one of the two of them will start against the Giants, and that's about the nicest thing I'm going to say there. Carolina quarterback, if you need one in Superflex, monitor this one. I think Bryce Young, coming off that win against New Orleans, is going to get the start, but it could be Andy Dalton. I'm not sure the way it's going to go. Dalton had like a thumb injury, so we don't know what's going on with that one as well. Dave Canales would not commit to a starter, but again, let's move on from that one. Running back. So running back, there's a couple of running backs that make my top 10 overall. Let's talk about Isaac Guerendo. So Christian McCaffrey looks set to return, but Guerendo had 102 combined yards and a touchdown in week 8. Jordan Mason has been dealing with a shoulder injury, and this could increase Guerendo's opportunities. And also when it comes to McCaffrey, like we don't like the fact that he's banged up. There's a chance for a re-aggravation. This is a couple weeks back, we had Christian McCaffrey going to Germany getting like second opinions. So like we can't get too comfortable here. And Isaac Guerendo, like we've seen it now. Guerendo was extremely explosive, and he had that big game where actually caught a couple passes as well. So Guerendo still has, because of the quality of the offense and because of his explosiveness, his athleticism, this is a guy that we want, and he makes my top 10 overall. Ray Davis, top 10 overall edition. Newsflash, like I'm sure you figured that one out. Ray Davis, we've been saying this for a few weeks now. He's one of the league's top handcuff running backs. Joe Brady offense is featuring the running back. We've had several weeks where the running back position has put up very strong numbers in Buffalo. Ray Davis, if James Cook were to miss time, would be a massive addition and would be a guy that would be really a low-end RB1 because of his ability to catch passes and his ability to absorb volume. And like we saw this previous week, his ability to make explosive plays. 67-yard catch and run. Ray Davis, you want him on your roster. Justice Hill, available in 80% of leagues. Caught 3 passes this past week for 43 yards. Added 5 carries. Baltimore blew out Denver. If Derrick Henry were to miss time, Hill would gain significant value. But Hill would also potentially be in a split with Keaton Mitchell. And Keaton Mitchell is available to you in 90% of leagues. So Mitchell is a really fun stash, especially if you have an injured reserve spot. Mitchell had a 20-yard run in every single game last season. Let's add him where we can. So Justice Hill has value, but Keaton Mitchell also has value, and he costs you less. Both players available 80% of leagues. Trey Benson we should be excited about because he had his best game as a pro. He scored a touchdown, and he had 55 total combined yards. If James Conner were to miss time, Benson would be a mid-level RB2 with upside. There's a few of these guys could have made the top 10 overall this week. Benson is definitely one of them. It was really a flat week when we got to the second half of the top 10, but Benson is like a high-end handcuff. This is a week for high-end handcuffs. Do I like him more than a Ray Davis? No. Do I like him more than an Isaac Guerendo? No, but that's one where I could be wrong on it. If James Conner misses time, and he usually does, Benson would be a massive addition. I just trust the San Francisco 49ers offense a little more if we're playing like a contingent upside game. Another player who we should be excited about, and pour one out for Ty Chandler. Ty Chandler is one where anybody who watched this show, I was very excited about Ty Chandler. I'll take the L on Ty Chandler this year. Certainly did not do what I thought he was going to do as sort of a handcuff plus. Really, he's been eliminated in Minnesota. Cam Akers is the guy there. Cam Akers, available in 94% of leagues, is a very intriguing addition this week because he had 8 touches for 53 yards. They showed that they are willing to pass to him. This was not a throwaway game against Indianapolis. This was a pretty competitive one. And obviously Minnesota covered the spread. But this was one, if anybody watched the game, like Akers had touches in meaningful parts of the game. So if Aaron Jones were to miss time, Akers would be a mid-level RB2. In the short term, he may be kind of usable in bye weeks if we see his role expand. Akers look good. So Minnesota likes him, and Aaron Jones, 29 years old, despite his incredible usage, 29-year-old back, second half of the year. We want that handcuff. Speaking of handcuffs, Blake Corum, one of the league's most valuable handcuffs. And given Kyren Williams' usage and the quality of the Rams' offense, Blake Corum becomes even more valuable despite not getting a lot of touches. Kimani Vidal, available in 92% of leagues. Backup, J.K. Dobbins backup. That's all I'm really going to say about Kimani. He hasn't seen that sort of touch level that we saw with Gus Edwards earlier in the year. So let's keep Gus Edwards in mind because he's going to be back soon enough. He is available in 83% of leagues. And Gus was averaging 9.5 carries per game before his injury. Do I think Kimani Vidal should be the handcuff there? Yes, I do. But with the coaching staff, with Greg Roman and Harbaugh, we can't put it past them that Gus just passes Vidal whenever he gets healthy. Trey Sermon, only pay attention to this one if you roster Jonathan Taylor and you want to sort of protect your investment. Trey Sermon is back to being the number 2 back ahead of Tyler Goodson in Indianapolis. Jaylen Wright. Jaylen Wright actually had some snaps last week. Raheem Mostert had a fumble, but Jaylen Wright is available in 94% of leagues. And Jaylen Wright, if Devon Achane or Raheem Mostert were to miss time, Wright would gain fantasy value. He has 2 contingent upside outcomes here in Miami. MarShawn Lloyd. MarShawn Lloyd is available in 95% of leagues. You guys know I like MarShawn Lloyd. This is one where Green Bay's on a bye. If MarShawn Lloyd is healthy and ready to go, I think when we come back in week 11, he is the RB2 in Green Bay. I think he will be ahead of Chris Brooks and Emmanuel Wilson. And I think MarShawn Lloyd is a guy who can help the Packers on the second half of the season. And then we got to talk about Khalil Herbert. So Khalil Herbert gets traded to Cincinnati for a 7th round pick. This says to me a couple things. It means Zach Moss, that neck injury, serious. Zach Moss, I don't know when we'll see him back. And Khalil Herbert certainly will cap the upside of Chase Brown. Chase Brown is going to be fine. You could still play him, but Chase Brown played 80% of snaps. 80% of snaps is not going to happen with Khalil Herbert there. Khalil Herbert is an effective runner. He's worlds better than Travion Williams. We've seen Khalil Herbert help us in fantasy on specific weeks over the years. Last year, the year before, his rookie year, Khalil Herbert had a couple of weeks. He is a very good runner. Way less versatile. I think for Chase Brown, Chase Brown's receiving work should stay static, but he's going to concede some touches to Khalil. And if Khalil plays very well, this is actually a very solid landing spot. So doesn't make my top 10, but I would be very happy to add him. This week, there's so many guys to add at the running back position. It really could have been like a top 15. We'll give a couple of honorable mentions after we do the top 10. So Khalil Herbert is a Cincinnati Bengal. This also for Roschon Johnson. Roschon Johnson sort of like is going to stay where he's at. This is it. Like if, let's say, DeAndre Swift gets injured, Roschon Johnson would be a guy that is a high-end handcuff, and there's way fewer risk of like conceding touches to a Khalil Herbert if it was like a full-on Roschon. Like Roschon would get 70% of the running back touches if Swift were to miss time. So he gains some value in this as well. And then the last 2 running backs to talk about for deep leaguers, Jeremy McNichols, available in 98% of leagues. Brian Robinson was out. McNichols had some touches behind Austin Eckler. if the Robinson health remains an issue throughout the year, McNichols could be a guy to consider adding. Austin Eckler, again, an older running back. McNichols, we've seen him play pretty well on a per-touch basis this year in Washington, and that's a very good offense. Audric Estime for deep leaguers. Estime is available in 99% of leagues, but there's reports that Estime is going to see an increased role. There's a few beat reporters reporting this. This seems like something that Denver is sort of leaking. They need a spark after that Ravens game, and Estime, think Braelon Allen type running back. I know that Estime had that fumble against New Orleans in a week where Javonte went nuts, but Estime was a 5th-round pick out of Notre Dame, set the single season record for rushing touchdowns at Notre Dame. And if you kind of live under a rock, Notre Dame's been playing football for a long time. They've won a lot of games. They've had a lot of NFL running backs. So that's not like a throwaway stat. So, wow, a lot of running backs we talked about. Hopefully you're still tuned in because tight end and wide receiver is going to be a little shorter. Mike Gesicki, our top tight end ad, top 10 ad, easy. Mike Gesicki had 27 PPR points this past week. If you watch my Sleepers show, Sleepers, Streamers, and Stashes at the end of the week, you would have heard that Gesicki was our top streamer at the tight end position, and we said you could flex him. So I hope you start watching that show later this week and listening to the podcast. We were on point with Mike Gesicki, and it wasn't like we're doing rocket science over here. There's been a correlation between Mike Gesicki fantasy scoring and T. Higgins playing or not playing. So when T. Higgins is out, Gesicki's scoring goes up. Very simple. The usage for Gesicki increases when T. Higgins is out. Now you have Eric All suffering what could be a really horrible injury for him, which is just terrible because Eric All is a guy who overcame injuries, made it to the NFL, and now another injury for him to deal with. And that was a player that was sort of ascending in the dynasty level. So tough one for Eric All. But when one door closes, another opens up. So Gesicki is going to see increased usage at the tight end position for the rest of the year. Like Drew Sample is a glorified offensive lineman. Gesicki is going to be the tight end who catches the passes. And in any week that T. Higgins is out, Gesicki's usage goes up. So last week, he gets 100 receiving yards, 5 catches, 2 touchdowns. The week before, he had 7 catches for 73 yards. So we're talking about a very impactful tight end for the rest of the year. Gesicki's a top 5 addition for us this year. Jonnu Smith, available in 91% of leagues. Jonnu also makes my top 10 overall. And the reason is target volume. Jonnu Smith is sort of a locked-in high-end tight end 2 with tight end 1 potential over the second half of the season. He's had at least 6 targets in 4 straight games, and he's caught 5 passes for 46 yards on Sunday. So, Jonnu had the production when Tua Tagovailoa was out, and most people completely ignored that because that was they couldn't get the ball to wide receivers. But a funny thing has happened. He's continued to receive targets despite Tua Tagovailoa being back. So, Jonnu Smith is super interesting right now. Over the second half of the season, I think he could have some impactful games for us in fantasy. At least 6 targets in 4 straight games for a tight end, very solid. Now, Theo Johnson, deep leaguers, pay attention to Theo Johnson. Not only does he have the best first name in football, period, he's coming off of a career-high performance. 6 targets, 3 catches for 51 yards and a touchdown. This youth movement in New York, say whatever you want about the Giants, but there have been multiple rookies making impacts on both sides of the ball. For fantasy football, you've already seen it with Malik Neighbors, Tyrone Tracy. Theo Johnson certainly is not going to do what those guys have done, but we want to pay attention to this. If he can start seeing this sort of target volume, he's very athletic, historically athletic at the tight end position. One thing to pay attention to in New York today, there's a chance that Darius Slayton gets moved, and that would create further opportunities for tight ends to get targets. Jatavian Sanders, available in 99% of leagues. We talked about him for a few weeks, and then he was non-existent in week 8. So week 6, week 7, he had 11 catches combined. Then in week 8, completely disappeared. And then in week 9, 4 catches for 87 yards, best game he's had as a pro. This could be sort of a sign of things to come for Jatavian Sanders. We want to keep an eye on him. And if you're in a dynasty format, make sure Theo Johnson, Jatavian Sanders, those guys are rostered because they could see increased usage over the second half of the season. Grant Calcaterra. Calcaterra is still in this like Dallas Goedert role. And we finally saw like a game that was sort of impactful for him. He caught 5 passes and nothing special. But if you're in a tight end premium format, a deeper format, Calcaterra is on the radar. He also had a 58 receiving yard week in week 8. So it's sort of been like ticking up slightly. Calcaterra for deep leaguers. Another one for deep tight end premium managers, Chigoziem Okonkwo, only if you're in tight end premium. He was targeted 4 times. He caught 3 passes this week. Nothing special, but if you're looking for like depth at the tight end position, he's there. He's passed Wiley by. He's the tight end in Tennessee. Terrible offense, but hey, Chigoziem Okonkwo, everything comes full circle. A couple years ago, we were excited at him. Now we're not excited at him, but he is getting the tight end work. Final position to discuss, wide receiver. Ricky Pearsall, available in 72% of leagues, right under our threshold for rosters. So this guy's very intriguing this week. You have Jawan Jennings coming back. You also have Christian McCaffrey getting healthy. You do not know which way the tides are going to shift with Ricky Pearsall. This was a guy who had a couple of plays where he flashed, and he's only played 2 games this season. But the bye week matters. And during the bye week, San Francisco may have decided to get Ricky Pearsall more work. And the Jawan Jennings threat, they might decide Pearsall is just going to be ahead of Jennings for the year, despite Jennings having the really strong, huge couple of games this year and the one game where he was wide receiver 1 overall. Like, this is a range of outcomes play. So if you want a surefire thing, it's not Ricky Pearsall. But if you want a player that could potentially pop for you with first-round draft capital pedigree, Ricky Pearsall could be a guy that helps you over the second half of the year as a flex, or he could be a guy where you're annoyed you added him. I don't know which way this is going to go, but I'm going to add him in a few leagues where he's available, and I'm excited to do so. Xavier Legette, top 10, makes my top 10 this week. He's been targeted 13 times over the past 2 weeks, and he scored a touchdown in both games. He has 4 touchdown catches this season. He's starting to emerge. This was a first-round pick for Carolina, and he's going to be a full-time player moving forward for the rest of the year. You will absolutely know more about what Xavier Legette is over the second half of the season because you're going to see him on the field an absolute ton. Jalen Coker took a big step back this week. The whole idea that Jalen Coker was going to really challenge Xavier Legette, I think we were a little too excited about Coker and not kind of as excited as we should have been about Legette. Adam Thielen, available in 75% of leagues. We talked about the trade deadline. Thielen could get traded today. So if he gets traded to the right situation, you're like, okay, I've got something there. There's going to be teams where if Adam Thielen is traded to them, he could step in and be an instant wide receiver 2. You also have, if he stays on Carolina, he's probably going to be on the field on wide receiver 2, on 2 wide receiver sets, and he's the most pedigreed wide receiver still on the team. So Thielen's sort of under the radar, available in 75% of leagues. Deontay Johnson not being there helps Adam Thielen if he returns to Carolina, and of course has the range of outcomes where he could end up on another team. Jalen Tolbert, available to you in 77% of leagues. He's had minimal production, but he had 6 targets this past week and caught a touchdown. He's a floor play, but he would see a significant increase in target share if CeeDee Lamb were to miss time. It sounds like CeeDee Lamb is good to go, and it's not going to be anything serious, but shoulder injuries are funny. They can flare up. Keep an eye on Jalen Tolbert. Demario Douglas makes my top 10 overall. Demario Douglas, if you're looking for a wide receiver to add in New England, it's Douglas. He was targeted 9 times, and he finished with a season-high 7 catches. The production in terms of yardage was not there, but again, he's a target magnet. He's had 9 targets or 4 times since week 3. Again, he's had 4 games where he's been targeted 9 times since week 3. So he's got the floor, and he's one of the preferred targets of Drake May. If we see Drake May continue to take, a progression in terms of being like quarterback productivity, Demario Douglas could be a guy that's in our flex down the stretch. Demarcus Robinson, very touchdown dependent, but Demarcus Robinson caught 3 touchdowns over the last 2 weeks, and he made the game-winning catch. So, like, this is one where Matt Stafford trusts him on big money throws, end zone throws, deep throws. Demarcus Robinson is a guy he trusts to make big plays. He's really difficult to trust for us if Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are in the lineup, but Robinson is still a guy that if you're in a deep format, pick him up. Now, Quentin Johnston is going to be very high up in my top 10 overall rankings. Returned from injury, and now he's in a prominent role, and he delivered impressive production. And this is occurring with Justin Herbert seeing increased usage as a passer. So the first half of the season, the Chargers really were in this like archaic Stone Age offense. Now you're seeing like Herbert pass for 270 yards plus every single week. And he's had a couple of very, very good games. We all know Justin Herbert is a really good quarterback, but Quentin Johnston scored a 66-yard touchdown this past week, and he had 4 catches for 180 yards. So 4 catches, 118 yards, and a touchdown. Very solid stat line. Chargers also gave him a manufactured rushing attempt, which went nowhere, but they're still trying to get the ball in his hands. If we see this offensive passing game trending up, Quentin Johnston's going to be an interesting one. And if you're in a deep league, Josh Palmer continues to do just enough to be mentioned here. Elijah Moore, available to you in 86% of leagues. Disappointing production, but the targets are there. Over the last 3 weeks, Elijah Moore has been targeted 27 times. According to my math, that means he's averaging 9 targets a game over the last 3 games. Someone fact check me in the chat here. Let me know if my math is correct. But Cleveland goes on a bye week this week. Elijah Moore could come out of the bye week with similar target volume that we've seen over the past 3 weeks. Any wide receiver that's getting targeted 9 times a game with Jameis Winston willing to take shots is worth being on our bench. Parker Washington. Parker Washington I had in the top 10 last week. He's not going to be there this week, but Parker Washington did lead Jacksonville in targets this past week with 6. In the first game, Christian Kirk was out. Now, Gabe Davis missed, and Brian Thomas was banged up. So, like, Parker Washington, I don't know if this is going to be a thing, but add him if you're in a deep format. Another deep format ad, Noah Brown, available in 98% of leagues. Noah Brown caught the game-winning Hail Mary in week 8, and Washington rewarded him by continuing to use him in week 9. 5 catches for 60 yards. Noah Brown is trending up. Washington, it's been sort of the Jaden Daniels show, and this offense has been extremely effective, but they need weapons in Washington. This is not like a locked-in, surefire offense right now. Ray McCloud, available to you in 84% of leagues, had 3 catches and caught a touchdown this past week. He'd be a streaming option if Drake London is unable to play. Kayshon Boutte, available in 99% of leagues. He's become a full-time player for the Patriots. So, like, not doing really anything here, but Boutte has been a full-time player. Now, your top 10 overall additions. Drake May, number 1. Mike Gesicki, number 2. Quentin Johnston, number 3. Ray Davis, number 4. Isaac Guerendo, number 5. Xavier Legette, number 6. Demario Douglas, 7. Ricky Pearsall, 8. Jonnu Smith, 9. And Cam Akers, 10. And I'll say with Cam Akers at 10, you could also throw in Blake Corum and Trey Benson there. Sort of our high-end running back handcuffs make it up at number 10 if you're looking for another player to add. So again, our top 10 overall additions. Drake May at 1. Mike Gesicki at 2. Quentin Johnston at 3. Ray Davis at 4. Isaac Guerendo at 5. Xavier Legette at 6. Demario Douglas at 7. Ricky Pearsall at 8. Jonnu Smith at 9. And Cam Akers at 10. I'm Theo Gremminger. This is Waiver Wired. We want you to help you crush your leagues this season. Remember to be 1 week ahead on the Waiver Wire, and make sure you're tuning in for press coverage, my podcast later in the week, and make sure you're tuning into Sleepers, Streamers, and Stashes. You can watch that on Player Profiler YouTube, or you can listen to it anywhere you get your podcasts. The Sleeper Show is going to help you out if you like shows like this and you're looking to get that edge later in the week. And make sure you're tuning in to School of Scott. I'm doing a podcast with Scott Barrett over on Fantasy Points. You can subscribe to that anywhere you get your podcasts. Week 10, we're in November. It's time to get wins every single week. It's time to make sure our roster is as strong as it gets heading in to the fantasy football playoffs.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.